This is an inspirational session for the TICKET program, a program funded by the Erasmus. It's transnational intercultural competences through knowledge exchange and teaching. And in this light, we have invited others to present some inspirational sessions. TICKET itself is a modular self-directing training program created to support staff in developing intercultural skills. And it is developing a toolkit with one of these webinars as well, 9 inspirational webinars to further support staff as they engage with the toolkit, providing access to existing resources and projects. So these modules have 4 themes. Today's theme is in mobility. So the 4 themes are mobility, student needs, internationalization of the curriculum, and university as an intercultural workplace. So as I said, CM here will do, one from CM will do a presentation on the mobility theme. And we are creating 9 modules as shown earlier, and 3 modules in the mobility section, 2 in the student needs, 3 for internationalization of the curriculum, and 1 for university as an intercultural workplace. So in this light, I'm going to give Juan the floor, and he'll tell us about CM and how this ties to the mobility of TICKET. So Juan, please.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to with all of you today. I think you can hear me and see me well. Yes? Is it okay? The audio and the video, etc. I'm gonna, well, let me just share my screen to start presenting. And I think that you can also see my screen if I'm not wrong. Yes, because I can also see it, so that's very good. Well, great pleasure to be here today talking a bit about inclusive mobility. It's super nice to do it in the framework of the TICKET project, because I think that we do have a lot of similar objectives compared to the ones that we have in CIM. Start by introducing myself and my organization that hopefully many of you already know. I am Juan, the of the Erasmus Student Network. For those who don't know us, ESN is the key international student and alumni volunteering organization in Europe. We have 41 national organizations with more than 500 local associations, basically all over the continent, and currently even expanding beyond the borders of Europe. And we work basically for the enrichment of society through international students. And this mainly has, let's say, 2 building blocks, which is access to mobility, so more opportunities for more people from more backgrounds to participate in mobility and internationalization, and also the impact of mobility, which, by the way, is very much connected with that blog that I have just seen in the TICKET project about the effect of international students in the campus, etc. For ESN, the topic of inclusion in all the possible senses has been a priority for quite a while, but a few years ago, in 2018, we started to think that there was a need to move forward with data collection, with real information about the challenges that students face. Since you know, the topic of inclusion has been a big priority, especially since the midterm review of the previous Erasmus Plus program, in which the whole higher education sector, I would say even the whole international education sector, started to discuss how, even though the effects of Erasmus were very positive, we do have more data on how internationalization brings benefit, not only to the student population, but to communities at large. There are clear problems in terms of access to mobility. And at the same time, as all of you know, for years, we have identified many challenges related to interaction between students and local communities. So what we thought, basically, when we were building this CIM project is, okay, let's combine the aspect of widening participation with the internationalization I mentioned, right? How interaction can lead to more inclusion, to more awareness about mobility, to reaching out to more people that might not know about mobility opportunities. And this is how CIM was born. But enough about me. Now let's learn a bit more about you. I think many of you already wrote your name there in the chat, but it would be really useful if you can connect to Slido. I think that by now you all know Slido, and you can tell me a bit more about from which university and country do you come from, because it can also be very useful for me as a follow-up for the session. So if you can take a moment, you can go to Slido, to that link. You go to the slido.com and you write that code and you can start writing university and country. University, city and country, etc. to see who we have also, because I cannot really check the chat at the same time. University of Amsterdam, Granada, I think that's probably Tive, who's enjoying the city. Berlin, Amsterdam, we have many people. Edinburgh. We have people from Ecuador even. A bit more time. Also to make sure that you all have the Slido close to you, because we will be having a lot of these interactive questions, because gathering your input is a key part of the presentation. Leuven, Stockholm University. We have many people from Ecuador. That's very nice. Fantastic. I think that Amsterdam is quite predominant here, but we have people from different countries. Very good. So now let's learn a bit more about what you're doing in your institutions, whether you're working in the International Relations Office, if you're academic, you're working on curriculum development, whatever you're doing, all the positions are quite relevant for the scope of this presentation. So we do want to hear from you. Assistant professor, student, fantastic, director of international affairs. We have a very nice combination of academics, practitioners, some students. So that's fantastic. Teaching and Learning Center. Exactly. This is exactly the diverse target group that we need for our presentation. So I'll give you a couple more minutes to share. Very, very good. Study counselor. Okay, very good. So now I think that we know who's in the room. We know it better. We can also see that there are many, but also a diversity of roles, which is super important, because here in the presentation, that diversity is key to work towards more inclusive mobility. Talking a bit about the main part of our presentation today, which is the CIM research report. The CIM research report is one of the biggest pieces of research in the field of inclusive mobility that has ever been done in the field of Erasmus+. We have both quantitative and qualitative data, which basically made this research very complete. Everything that I'm going to be presenting is also published in the CIM website. I will share the links later, and hopefully will help you to dig deeper if you have interest in the topic. We surveyed more than 12,000 students, and very importantly, almost 40% were non-mobile. So we didn't only ask mobile students, but also non-mobile students about their barriers to access mobility. We also had a staff survey, even though I will be focusing mainly on the student survey, but this is also research that is available. And we have focus groups and study visits. So we managed to get a very broad picture of the situation in terms of barriers to mobility, opportunities, and the challenges that students face. These are the main groups that we surveyed: first generation students, ethnic minority, low-income students, and rural students. And a very important part of this research is intersectionality, especially between first generation, ethnic minority, and low income. As you know, there's a lot of intersectionality, which also presents sometimes added barriers that need to be considered to widen participation in mobility. And you can see here the whole picture, the combination of mobile, non-mobile, and the types, etc. So just to give you a bit more about the profiles are also a bit, I'd say quite interesting, because fields like engineering are overrepresented compared to their normal participation in mobility, which is very interesting because, as you know, especially engineering, natural sciences, medical sciences face added barriers in terms of participation in mobility. So they can be considered, as per the new criteria in Erasmus+, also underrepresented groups, because they face many times educational barriers related to recognition and to many other issues that we'll see later. We're going to start the presentation, explaining the findings, talking a bit about strategy and offer. So how the things that the universities offer to students can affect participation in student mobility. One of the first things that we ask students is about their impressions in terms of actual participation in mobility, so in which programs they participated, compared to their interest to go on mobility, if they haven't been on mobility yet. So we can see that there is a common trend towards long-term mobility being the most attractive form of mobility. You can see it here, that most students want to go on Erasmus Plus studies as the most common type of mobility. But we also see something that is very relevant when we plan our international offer. And that is that non-mobile students are more interested in a diverse type of mobility opportunities. There is a lot of interest in Erasmus Plus traineeships, which also connects with employability dimension and the financial challenges that the students face. So traineeships are more appealing for students from free opportunities backgrounds that are not mobile yet than for the population that has participated in mobility. Therefore, targeting communication about these traineeships can be a very effective way to bring more people to mobility. And also now that there's a lot of debate on the role of short-term mobility, etc., we also see that students are interested in short-term mobility and other types of mobilities in general, including volunteering programs. So the bottom line here is that if we manage to create a diversified mobility offer, it's going to be easier to bring more students and more diverse students to our mobility opportunities. Then there has been a lot of discussion also about the perfect length of the mobility experience. It is quite clear that students do prefer longer mobilities, and this is applicable to mobile and non-mobile students, but we can also see that non-mobile students are more interested in short-term mobilities compared to mobile students. So a bigger percentage of non-mobile students would consider participating in mobility if these mobilities are short-term. Also to consider that short-term mobility should not be the main part of our international strategy, but should be another tool in our toolbox, because that's going to make it more appealing for more types of students. Now, probably the most important part of the presentation, the barriers to mobility, the actual barriers that students face to participate. And understanding the barriers is key to then design measures that can support the students overcoming these barriers. So we're going to start with a question as well. Considering your experience, because it's quite clear that all of you have experience in one way or the other, working with students, what type of barriers do students face in order to take part in a mobility experience? What are the main barriers that you see in your university, that you know because of your research, etc.? It's not a surprise that financial and money issues come very fast. Boyfriend and girlfriend, too many choices, so taking decisions, which is also difficult. Pressure. Visa, fair pressure, doesn't fit the curriculum, also something interesting, family at home. Let's take a bit more time to find it. Very interesting language skills, fair, network, family responsibilities. So money stays at the center, but we can see that there are a lot of different barriers that our participants identify. Homesickness as well. Career responsibility, something super specific. Very, very good. Okay, this is actually really, really interesting. So now let's see how these mobilities apply to the social model that we have created as part of the Simple. Some of you probably have heard about the social model of disability and challenge that people with disabilities face to participate in society. What we did with SIM is to adapt the social model to the mobility experience. And what we do is to divide the types of barriers that the students face in three main blocks. Institutional barriers, and those are the barriers related to the structure of the programs, the financial conditions, the conditions to access recognition. So everything related to the structure, to the way in which the programs are shaped. And then two that are a bit more, complex, I would say. Environmental barriers, these are the societal factors. Many of you mentioned some of them. Whether my boyfriend or girlfriend is supporting my participation, whether my family is encouraging me to go abroad, whether my friends have gone on Erasmus. Many things related to that social capital that many times, we talk about in the field. So depending on my atmosphere, my environment, it's going to be easier or more difficult to make a decision to go on mobility. And then last but not least, attitudinal barriers, the internal beliefs, the ideas that I have, the perception of myself that I have before taking the decision of going on mobility, right? Because this is the case that we see all the time that relates to the student thinking, mobility is not for me for a number of reasons. So what is actually really important is to move this broader analysis to the reality of your own institution, right? To apply it to the type of student population that you have, and to apply it to the conditions that the university offers in terms of access to mobility. And it's a very good way to create concrete measures to overcome the three types of barriers. We can see some examples here. You can see that insufficient funding, that many of you mentioned, advanced initial costs, loss of financial support, recognition, type of information that you receive, then environmental, more like family, society does not value enough the opportunity, etc. The attitudinal one. So you can see that this is a clear difference that then we can connect to this part, because in the new Erasmus Plus strategy, in the inclusion and diversity strategy, for those who know it, Erasmus Plus identifies a number of profiles, a number of backgrounds that can be used. This is not a number, it's not a closed list, so it's an open list, but can be a very useful way to understand what are the different backgrounds that we can target through different measures. So if you are aware of any of these backgrounds, please write it here. So basically, these are the ones that Erasmus Plus includes in its strategy, saying that this is not a closed list, but this can be taken as a reference for the new inclusion measures that we see in the program. Let's see what we get.
I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question. Could you just explain it one more time? Sorry.
Yes,
exactly. What are you asking us to write? Yeah.
So I'm going to write the different type of backgrounds that Erasmus Plus includes in the new strategy, in the new inclusion strategy. So which type of backgrounds are recognized by Erasmus Plus as backgrounds that are part of this fewer opportunities category. Okay, so there's this Erasmus Plus has this inclusion strategy, and in the strategy they said, okay, the following backgrounds can be considered part of this fewer opportunities category, and therefore access the extra financial support or certain measures that the program designs. Is it clear now? If you're not very familiar with the Erasmus Plus strategy, it can be a bit confusing, but that's fine. I don't know if I will show them now, so don't worry. Okay, so then we see here a number of backgrounds, first generation students, ethnic minorities, etc. And let me just show you the list. This is the list that is included in the Erasmus Plus inclusion and diversity strategy. Okay, so these are potential barriers that the Erasmus Plus program recognizes as different types of profiles that can affect the participation in mobility. And it can be useful. I mean, as you know, like this is a guidance document, so it's not mandatory for national agencies or universities to use, but it's a good guidance on how then you can connect those three types of barriers to the different backgrounds of students. We can see that barriers linked to education and training systems are more about the learning difficulties or low qualified adults, etc. And others, such as discrimination, are more connected to ethnic minorities, sexual orientation, etc. So this is a list given by the program to classify those type of barriers. And what we do in SIM is to kind of use our model to see which kind of measures we can provide to support students coming from these backgrounds to participate in mobility opportunities. And you know, here you can see some examples of personas that we create as an exercise, right? Now we don't have a lot of time to do it, but something that you can do in your institutions is to think how personas such as these ones connect with those three types of barriers that we presented at the beginning. So I don't know if, for instance, someone would like to tell us in the case of any of these personas, for instance, in the case of Peter, which kind of barriers related to this institutional, attitudinal and environmental these students face, like which kind of barriers and maybe which kind of things we could do to support them. So if anyone would like to take the floor and take one of these examples and to reflect on how they connect with the three types of barriers, please go ahead. Any volunteers? I think we don't have many volunteers for this one, but this is an exercise that you can always do in your universities, right? Considering your student population, considering the percentage of students from different social groups that face different challenges. You can think how their characteristics relate to the 3 types of barriers, and then we will see which kind of measures we can develop to help the students overcome these barriers. What are the reflections from our side? Well, the first one is that institutional barriers require an analysis of the existing processes and support measures that we have in our higher education institutions. So for instance, if we see that financial support is a problem in our institution, we can think about which kind of top-up, extra funding, financial measure we can take to support those students. If we see that the recognition processes are a problem for students, then we can think how we can improve the percentage of recognition, how we can convince coordinators and academics to improve recognition practices, etc. Then environmental and attitudinal barriers require new outreach strategies that require collaboration with other actors. Because in the end, to tackle these environmental barriers, we need to convince people about the societal role of mobility, about why sending students abroad is so important, about why our kids need to go on mobility because it's good for them. So probably this goes beyond the scope of the International Census Office, and it requires more outreach measures. And then when it comes to the attitudinal barriers, it's a lot about convincing individuals and showing them that mobility is also for them. And what we see a lot in the universities that have more mobilities around Europe is that you can clearly see this kind of internationalization and mobility culture in which the majority of students and even their families know that mobility is important for them. And since I think Tive is in Granada now, I want to put the example of University of Granada, where I also my alma mater. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was there in an event. And I remember that when I told them that I was the president of ESN, even one father came to me, oh, you need to help me convince my kid to go mobility, etc. Right? So there is a societal perception that mobility opportunities are good, and therefore our kids also need to take part in them and benefit from them. Now we're going to move to the practical part of the barriers to mobility and the things that the students have reported that make their participation challenging and difficult. The first one that we saw for mobile students is the need to advance initial costs. So many times we talk about financial barriers and we talk about the lack of money, so students not having enough money, but besides the amount of the grant, the timing of the grant is also extremely important. So you can see here that by quite a lot of difference, the majority of mobile students mentioned the need to advance initial costs as the main challenge that they had during their mobilities. Therefore, something to consider at the institutional level is when are my students getting their grants? Is it before the mobility? Is it right after arriving? Or is it 1 month, 2 months, etc.? In my case, when I went to mobility, I got my grant in November almost. And honestly, I was trying to match this data with some anecdotal evidence the other day in Spain. And unfortunately, this is still a big problem, as I will show you now. But then besides those financial barriers and opportunity cost barriers that are also quite important, you can see that a big percentage of the students say that the loss of income or loss of student job while abroad is also a big challenge. And this is especially important indeed in the case of students from fewer opportunities, because more of them need to work to sustain themselves. This is something you can also see in Euro student data. We also see that barriers that are connected to the effects of lack of recognition are quite important. So for instance, additional debt incurred from a longer degree program or the extension of the degree program. And as you know, the norm in mobility should be recognition, even automatic recognition. So on paper, there should be no need to extend the study period. However, this is not the reality for a majority of the students. So they report these problems with recognition that are there a bit hidden, let's say, but are quite important to design inclusion measures as one of the main challenges that they have. And then you can also see that elements related to friendship, social ties, and family are also quite relevant. However, what we see is that the duration of the mobility doesn't seem to be a big problem for mobile students. And then, if you can tell me just an example among all the things that we saw before, the additional, the need to stay more time in the degree, the financial burdens, the receival of the grant being too late, which one is more prevalent in your higher education institutions? That would be great. Let's see how you relate to these findings. extension of the degree, the timing of the grant, financial, the timing. Okay, it's nice to see that many of you are very much in line. The job, the interruption of social ties, the Amsterdam student life, which is indeed quite appealing. Very good, very good. So now we have a better picture of the barriers that mobile students face. And now, before moving to the ones that non-mobile students face, let's elaborate a bit more on the data. Something that I did for this presentation is to combine SIM data with some of our data from the ESL survey. So these are two pieces of research that actually combine very well. Because what we see is that more than a quarter of students receive their grants later than 1 month after the beginning of their exchanges. And only 1/3 receive their grants before the mobility. And this is the most practical challenge that the students face, as you can see. And the problem is that the differences between countries, you can see that in Spain and France, but in Spain is way more than half of the students, in France is almost half, and in Italy is 1/3 of the students facing these problems. So out of the 4 main Erasmus countries, only Germany has what we could qualify as good numbers in terms of the timing of the receival of the grant. And also what we see with these numbers is that this is a policy decision, right? Because it's not about the size of the country. Germany has way more students than Italy, for instance, in terms of Erasmus participation, but the timing of the grants is much better in Germany. So something to consider is how is it working in your university and whether it can be improved to support the needs of the students. Of course, the bureaucracy is also a big problem. This is also something that we saw quite clearly in the qualitative part. Especially in an era in which students are used to use an app for everything and to sort out all their problems through an app in a very easy and streamlined way, sometimes the processes to apply for mobility can be too challenging. And this is when we see a lot of dropouts, people starting and then not being fully convinced, etc. So the importance of explaining these clear timelines is key. So students, before applying, can fully understand what is the timeline, what are all the steps, etc. Then how can we improve those scholarships? Well, actually, many of the things that we need to do are already included in the Erasmus regulation. So hopefully in the next few years, more and more national agencies and more universities will take these steps. If you will have to get one takeaway from this presentation, I would like it to be the fact that there's nothing you can do that's more important for inclusion than the pre-financing of the mobilities, making sure that all the students get the money before the mobilities. There is no evidence that this is a risk for your finances in the university. There's no evidence that the students will get the money and don't go. They will remain students of your universities after the mobility, and therefore you can always sign the contract in a way in which if they don't complete the mobility, they need to pay it back. But it will help them a lot to properly plan their time abroad, to properly afford accommodation and all the expenses that students have. And also very important, in a time of inflation, it's really important that you talk to your national agencies and you convince them of the need of raising the grants to adjust them to inflation. Because if we are giving the same grants now that we were giving 2 years before, students are 20% poorer probably than they were had they gone in mobility in 2019, 2018. So the grants can be adjusted every year. It is important to prioritize doing so, especially in a time of inflation. And now, just covering a bit the challenges faced by non-mobile students. You can see that the funding appears again, and you can see that even though the concrete items are a bit different, the trends are similar. So we have funding, we have flexibility, and we also have information. Lack of knowledge appears as a very relevant issue. We also see that many students fail in their applications, which is also something to consider, that many students do want to go but don't get to go. And this is why expanding opportunities is quite important. And we can see that, at least among the ones that fill in the survey, interest is not a problem. This is also quite normal since they are filling in the survey. So interest is clearly something that they have. Something that we see also quite a lot is not only about the amount of money, it's not only about the timing, it's also about the clarity about the conditions. So the conditions of the mobility experience can be very confusing for students. They don't really understand who's paying the grant, when the grant is arriving, what are the conditions, how much they are getting each month, etc. And the best example of this it's the reference to the top-ups. You know that the top-ups are a key part of the new inclusion strategy of the program, but still 12% of the students did not know whether they are getting a top-up or not. So that clearly shows that when we are explaining the conditions of the mobility experience, we need to cover specifically the financial part. When are they arrive? How much is the amount of the grant? Who's very important to elaborate on this financial literacy that will help students to plan their mobilities better. And now digging a bit deeper in the recognition part, combining a bit some of the qualitative part with the quantitative part. You can see that lack of flexibility, concerns, etc., appear there significantly, and also that we see a difference between satisfaction with recognition of mobile participants and the perception from participants that want to participate in the program but haven't done so. So what we see when we check our trends when it comes to data is that the satisfaction with recognition among mobile students has improved significantly since 2016. So since basically the beginning of the previous Erasmus program, 2014-2020, more students that take part are satisfied with recognition, but also more students than ever are afraid of going on mobility because of recognition reasons, because they think that their mobilities are not going to be recognized, that their professors might put some barriers to participation, etc. So you can see that, you know, like people are concerned, and this was also reported in the focus groups in which students reflected on how the perception of those barriers was quite important. These are the numbers that we got from the ESN survey. So 28% of students reported not receiving full academic recognition. So the numbers are worse than the ones in the participants report in Erasmus+. And what we know from the same data is that this affects more students from fewer opportunities backgrounds. And interestingly enough, probably many of you involved in mobility are also connected with ICM mobilities, the international credit mobilities. Satisfaction with recognition is higher among those students. So it's not necessarily a matter of, you know, like the farther you go, the worse the recognition, more about how different universities approach the issue. And I wanted to put some examples. We had an open box for problems with recognition here. And I think it's really interesting. Of course, we have more than 1,000 open answers there. So you can see that this is a very important topic for students. But here we can see some of the challenges. We can even see perceptions like this. Italy is less serious. So this is not a relation of trust, right? Because if there is a mobility, that means that there is an interinstitutional agreement that creates a framework for that mobility. So these conceptions are not very helpful. Then equivalence, we see a lot the problem of equivalence of even the names of the courses. And this is a big mistake because this is not what ECTS are for, right? The idea is that we focus on learning outcomes and not necessarily on the exact names of the courses. So you can see that those problems that have been there for a while still persist, and they affect more and more students from fewer opportunities backgrounds. And what is the challenge? Well, word of mouth is a big thing when it comes to participation in mobility. So the perception that the student population has about recognition is going to affect students quite a lot, especially students from fewer opportunities that are studying in state-recognized professions and fields such as medicine, engineering, etc. So those students face that double discrimination to participate in mobility, which is also quite problematic, right? Because they also need to develop these global skills that we try to acquire through mobility. So indeed, tackling those groups and convincing them that recognition in your university is actually good and that there are measures to ensure recognition is quite important. Now, some of our recommendations to improve mobility programs related to the strategy, to the financial conditions, etc., and to the process. The first one is to streamline the process. So from the very beginning, focusing on explaining clearly all the steps to participate in mobility, to making sure that students have the clear picture of what is going to happen at each point, to set concrete and clear contact points, and in general also to involve other students and alumni so they can reinforce, they can support students making those decisions and avoiding dropouts, etc. Then outline academic attainment. This is extremely important because, as you saw before, for students from fewer opportunities backgrounds, there's a big fear that going abroad is going to mean getting worse grades, losing some of their courses, having to extend their degree. So explaining clearly how going on mobility can benefit their academic achievement and bring better employability and better results down the line, it's going to be quite important to convince those students. And also indeed creating a culture of feedback in which you as universities can get these ideas from the students, can create these channels of communication in which whenever they face a problem or whenever they see something that is not working related to student mobility and internationalizations, they share it with you. So we encourage you to use focus groups, to have these clear channels that are established and not ad hoc, so students can share their concerns. Because many times what we see in ESN is that these problems are there, but universities don't even know because students do not communicate these problems. So we only find about these problems through the surveys, etc., without any previous communication between the students and the universities. Now, elaborating a bit more in the financial parts. This is a super concrete question for those of you who might be familiar with this very nice Erasmus infographics. And it's what was the average Erasmus Plus grant in 2020. This is available information from the annual report of Erasmus Plus that is published every January. So let's see who knows the exact number. And you cannot look at you cannot search it in Google now. You need to guess. No idea. That's a very honest answer. 850. Like I wish it was 850. This is the monthly grant. Huh? For study, okay, for study. Even though this is the general average, like the data that the Erasmus Plus provides is the general average. 250 per month.
Oh, you were asking for the monthly amount.
Yeah, this is the monthly grant.
Sorry, yeah.
It depends, of course, that's important, depends on each country, we'll see now. But okay, we see a diversity of numbers. There is someone who's quite close, actually. Very 350. Okay, so that's very good, actually, because the average Erasmus Plus grant for Key Action 131, okay, so for studies and traineeships combined, it's 374 euros. These are the official numbers. Of course, very important, national agencies are responsible for determining the exact amount following the parameters given by the European Commission in the program guide. But that's the average. And what is the problem? That the cost of living that the students report is way higher than the average. You can see that more than half of the students, 60%, actually 65%, report a cost, a monthly cost, that is higher than 501 euros. So basically the grants are not enough to cover for the expenses of the vast majority of the students. What are the good news in the new program? That we have these 250 euro top-ups that can support the students and that can create that balance and provide enough money to a bigger number of students to face their monthly expenses. So with that, the average grant could be a bit higher, would be more than 600 euros. And the great thing about this also is that national agencies, together with national authorities, have the capacity to raise these grants. And of course, universities, whenever they have financial resources, they can also top up those grants, including extra financial support. And well, you can see here the difference between the offer support versus the needed support. And the non-mobile respondents clearly communicate that they would need a higher amount of their expenses to be covered by the grant. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible for them to participate. So also to consider that in the end, we can think about many different solutions, but it's always going to be needed to have financial support to help students taking part in mobility opportunities. And the other interesting funding is that intersectionality plays a very important role, right? So if a student is connected with more than one fewer opportunity background, they also face extra challenges to participate in mobility and they require extra financial support. Now, moving a bit to the promotion and the support to students, we are slowly reaching the end of the presentation, but I would love to learn if you are involved in mobility in any way, what are the kind of things that your university does to promote mobility, to prepare students before they leave, and to ensure that they are properly prepared before starting their mobility experiences. So if you do information sessions, if you do workshops, if you do buddy systems before, etc. So we have information sessions, we have pre-departure workshops, tutor meetings, that's fantastic, finding the right program. Okay, so many of you have information, questions and answer sessions, webinars, risk assessment, also very, very good. I'm interested in the risk assessment part. I don't know if the person who wrote it can share a bit out loud. What is the risk assessment that they do?
Or if you don't want to speak, you can put it in chat as well, if you want.
Yes, that's also fine. That's also fine. Okay. Okay, so we have meeting with current Erasmus students, reports from former Erasmus students. Okay, so there is a lot of peer-to-peer engagement. There's a lot of connection with students, which is fantastic. I'm super happy to see this. I clearly see that people in the Ticket project are quite connected to the role of intercultural promotion. So now let's see what is the data that we have coming from the students. What are the things that the students really care about when it comes to the preparation before the mobilities? There are three things that stand out. The first one will not come as a surprise. It's information about available funding. Students really want to know how much money they're going to access. And I'm also happy to tell you that now in a couple of weeks, ESN will launch a European-wide calculator. So all students can calculate their grant depending on the country from which they come from. And also very importantly, they can compare. And maybe they can start asking questions about why their grants are lower or higher compared to those of their peers. And you will be able to access it also through the SIM project website. But also two other things that are quite important and connected with some of the things that are there, which are the support with the application process, so the support navigating all the administrative steps, etc., and help choosing a housing. Someone wrote something very interesting about the mentorship and the guidance, and I think that this is something that we can improve a lot at all levels. The guidance, coaching dimension related to choosing a mobility destination based on the interests and motivations of the students. So the vast majority of students find this extremely relevant. Then other things were also found useful by students, but in a smaller scale, right? You can see that these three really stand out. So something to consider, how we are doing this in our institutions and how we can make it even clearer so more students can access it and benefit from this information. And here you can see basically the comparison between the other points of the data, meetings with international officers, group informations, briefing events, events organized by student organizations, etc. And then what is also very relevant, it's the perception of non-mobile students. So non-mobile students care even more about these information sessions. I would say, as an advice, the more diversified our offer is, the better, right? Because probably we will need different tools to target different students. But combining the more formal component about technical stuff, let's say, with a more peer-to-peer approach that many of you just highlighted in the comments there in Slido, it's indeed quite important. And something that we should consider, for me, this was one of the most interesting data points. What happens after the mobility experience? As you know, reintegration is listed in the Erasmus Charter of Higher Education as one of the key things that universities need to do. It's a big priority now in the new program, the concept of ambassadors, multipliers, etc. So what is the perception of students? Well, the majority of students would like to become multipliers, to join student organizations, etc. But then what they feel is that their sending institutions are not encouraging them that much. So they don't see that concrete support and encouragement to become ambassadors, to join the buddy programs, etc. So also something to consider, right? Because when we connect, when we cross this data with the satisfaction of the services provided by home institutions, so the university sending the students, we also see that the elements that get the lowest satisfaction are reintegration initiatives and alumni engagement. So there is clearly room for improvement when it comes to what happens after the mobility is over. And the great thing is that those alumni, those buddies, have a very important role attracting more people into mobility. So developing your own engagement strategy, be it together with the student organizations, together with the student union, etc., can be a very important step to increase participation in mobility. And of course, we have the, let's say, the legal framework. These are things that I like to put here just for curiosity, but we have the clear mention to the ambassador schemes and also to the inclusion action plans in the Erasmus Plus regulations. So also something that we would like to see more it's more action at the national level. I think we don't have a lot of national stakeholders here, but like pushing a bit national agencies so they create alumni strategies at the national level in which you can interact using the context, also the events that the NIH organize for universities can be a very important step to improve these measures. And now the last part, challenges and impacts related to the experience of the students. Also something very interesting, which are the main problems that the students face during their mobility. So we learned before about the ones that they face to access mobility, but what about the ones that they face once that they are abroad? So these are problems of mobile students that they report. Budgeting, okay, so very much connected to finances, homesickness, course registration, not enjoying the courses. Okay, so courses once again appears quite clearly. Discrepancy, also connected to recognition, host university, the experience of matching expectations, that indeed can be a problem for many students after the return recognition. Okay, so let's see how it connects with the data. Well, these surveys, both of them, were carried out mostly in the times of COVID. So many of the respondents are participants in the COVID era. So I think that the emergence of stress and anxiety are quite interesting. And of course, it would be interesting to see in our next research how these compare with normal times, with post-COVID times, even though now, unfortunately, we are not going through normal times either. But stress appears as a very important issue, also something to consider. Why international students are so stressed? Is it because the courses? Is it because the problems that they face in their day-to-day life? So quite clearly, feelings of stress and anxiety are also connected with other problems, right? But it is clear that now, amidst the debate related to mental health, it's important to consider how we support international students from a psychological point of view as well. We have problems related to the courses as a very big issue, and I think it will not come as a surprise, especially when we have so many Dutch participants here, the problems with accommodation that have become a very big issue in the last few years. And then affecting specifically students from free opportunities, we see that social exclusion is a big issue, as well as health problems. So this is data from general population, but it's especially interesting in this context. And then we also have more specific data related to students from fewer opportunities backgrounds. So here you can see that the vast majority of students had positive experiences abroad. So that's quite positive, but still almost a third felt that they were treated differently or unfairly at their host institution. And 50% felt that they did not have equal access to resources and opportunities compared to home students. So there has been a lot of improvement throughout the years with this, but this is still a problem, especially for students from fewer opportunities backgrounds. And these are the staff impressions. So I didn't add that many data points, but this is how staff members of the universities perceive the issues that students face, that international students face. And you can see, like many universities, well, around half say that they have university processes to tackle those issues when they emerge, that they have almost 80% measures to support international students in their academic work. And the perception is that, around 75% students of staff members either strongly agree or agree that students have equal access to opportunities compared to local students, right? So it's also interesting to, in the research, compare the perception that the staff have with the perception of participants in mobility programs. Indeed, in a time of pandemic, when we did this survey, health concerns were also a big issue, but in general, health concerns can be a problem for students. So this is one of the things that we perceive that also requires more specific approaches, making sure that in case a student gets sick during their mobility, there are clear procedures to support. And in general, the whole issue of support in the midst of emergencies that unfortunately now are happening more and more often is something to consider. What are the strategic and emergency response plans that our institutions have? In general, what is very useful is to dedicate some time of the pre-departure process, or the pre-departure support, to address all these concerns. So now you have this data. In the future, we also plan to create national fact sheets so you can use them, but trying to take the biggest concern that the students have and address them through information sessions, through emails, through guidelines, so they know in case of having a particular problem, what are the support measures in place, can be very useful. And this is something also that you can work on with your partner institutions through projects or through reinforced interinstitutional agreements, etc. Right? Because that is gonna make students way more comfortable taking the decision of going abroad. Just the final parts related to the treatment in the host society. You can see that, as we said before, almost 1/3 felt treated unfairly, and these are the different groups from which this treatment came. So you can see that other students are the main group, then also professors, staff, and colleagues in the workplace. This is specifically for those that were doing internships. The types of discrimination. So this is the general sample. The 24% did experience discrimination, and then those discriminations related to nationality in 16% of the cases, race and ethnicity, gender, social status, sexual orientation, religion, etc. You can see that nationality and ethnicity are the ones that cause students more problems, and therefore the ones that need to be addressed in terms of proper integration in the local community, support measures, awareness among the student population, etc. This is the sad part of the research, right? That we see that students from a net minority group are 10 times more likely to be discriminated on exchange with their peers, and students from an LGBTQ background are 15 times more likely to be discriminated. So these are things that indeed need to be addressed, because even though with students from LGBTQ background, we would think that everything is okay and that exchanges do not pose any particular challenges, these challenges are still there, and therefore measures that we take should be adapted to tackle them. But of course, the overall picture of our research is quite positive, right? This is why we have this bottom line that says that learning mobility leads to social mobility, because the data clearly shows that first, the experience of mobility improves academic achievement among students of various opportunities backgrounds. So we can use learning mobility as a way to foster social mobility and social cohesion, which I think is fantastic news. And also that these experiences bring very significant positive effects among the students, especially and even more significantly among those coming from fewer opportunities backgrounds. And these are related to intercultural competences, global competences, language learning, personal development, etc. So if we compare this data with the general sample, for instance, from ESN survey or the Erasmus Plus impact study, we see that it's even more impactful among these students. Just a summary of all the recommendations that we have, which are connected to more financial clarity, starting mobility promotion from an early age, so designing measures to bring the mobility promotion even beyond the universities, going to schools, working with youth workers, etc. Finding synergies among EU national and regional programs, so we can increase the amount of those mobility grants, making sure that grants are paid upfront, trying to, improve this co-financing and the general policy making at the national and regional level. So there are specific measures adapted to the reality of your cities, your regions, and your countries. Trying to create this culture of internationalization in universities. Also focusing on the competence development and academic attainment of the students, so they see that they're going to benefit specifically from the mobility. Creating targets and focusing on, the measures to gather data and improve towards those targets. And indeed, as many of you are doing from what we saw before, targeted peer-to-peer promotion involving alumni and involving the students. We don't have a lot of time, I think, but in case that you want to share, I would love to get some perspectives from you, whether you collaborate with the students and alumni, whether you have joined already with schools, youth workers, etc., whether your leadership in universities is also involved in the mobility promotion and they really support the internationalization of your university, and whether you also have tailored communication measures to overcome the students' concerns. So these are just some questions that I would love to discuss with you. If we don't have time, you can always reach out to me. I'm sure we will meet in different occasions, but something to reflect upon whether these things are happening and whether it will be possible to do them in the near future. And you can find all our publications here, simproject.eu research, we have these 3 and we have more publications coming. And also for those of you who might be available, we are going to have a final conference in Brussels. Registrations are almost closed, but since you might be available still, if you would like to come, you can just go to the SIM Project website or to contact me. I will leave you my email there, and we can give you all the information to join. That was it. Contacts with my colleague is our project coordinator, and I'm the president of ESN. Thank you so much. I hope that you like it. And now, if you have any questions or if you would like to discuss any of these issues, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan, for this very interesting presentation about mobility and all the things that come with it, and some very interesting data as well, making it more insightful what is actually what students actually come across. Like I said, we don't have that much time, so I also would like to ask the people here. This meeting has been recorded, so we will put it up on our website. I will show the link to that website in a minute. So you can always watch it and make comments by becoming part of our community of practice, joining us in a network of individuals with common challenges and interests, explore ways of working, identify common solutions, and share good practices and ideas. Surround yourself with colleagues who are going to lift you higher. So I would like to ask you to join us by signing up for our LinkedIn community and being informed about any new developments in this project. We are planning to finish this our ticket project by the end of this year, and all 9 modules to develop more intercultural skills will be on our website. It's an open educational resource. I am asking you to look at our website, and if you're not familiar with us, try to learn more. And of course, become a member of our community of practice and share your experiences in that platform. So I would again like to thank you, Juan, for this very interesting presentation, and everybody else for joining us today. If you have any questions, let us know and contact either Juan or us directly. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Hi, Juan. Can I just ask you, basically, I want to know what the stance is from the perspective of the of Erasmus, really. So one of the things that you mentioned, particularly for students from a diverse background, right, who have these sort of intersectional issues, was that they face discrimination. Now, what really can we do about that? I mean, I'm just wondering, what is the stance on Erasmus of doing about that? Because, so hypothetically, if we come across through surveys and through talks with students who come back that they experience that, I don't know, in a particular country, do we then recommend that students don't go there? Like, how far should we take that? You know what I mean? What is the stance there?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, right? And it's not easy to answer. I think that probably the most important part is to be transparent with students about these kind of things, meaning that students should know what the situation is, and they should still probably be encouraged to make their decision. I'm thinking about, I don't know, like a student from an LGBTQ background, right, might be thinking about going to a certain country. I think it's important to inform the students about the feedback coming from other students, about the problems, the challenges, the support possibilities in case something happens, etc. I don't think that the solution is indeed, unless it's really necessary, because it poses a clear risk for the student to finish the agreement. But I think that information is very important before the mobility happens, and also with the host organization, clear measures to respond to those problems. So who's going to offer psychological support? Who's going to offer guidance? Who's going to offer coaching, etc.? I don't know, are there NGOs or associations supporting students from a particular background? So I think that's the most important thing, because I do think that's our position in ESN, that it's always good to bring diversity, right? Like to bring this kind of diversity to places where the diversity might not be so welcome at the beginning. So that would be my take on how to. But indeed, emergency responses and emergency measures in case something happens are very important. So in case that there is any kind of problem, who should you contact? What are the clear contact points? What's going to happen, etc. Defining that, I think, would be the most important step. So I think this at least partly answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is a fantastic question. I can read it out loud. Maria asks, my question involves student placements with an organization external to the university they are based. We can implement a support policy within the university, but how can we implement it with a non-educational organization? Well, actually, Maria, this is a fantastic question. I think this is not the problem of the universities, meaning they're not the ones creating this situation, because the problem is that the Erasmus Plus program, and I don't think that any other program works differently, doesn't have any kind of quality, quality guidance for non-higher education institutions involved in Erasmus traineeships. So then what I think is really important is from the university, making sure that you also get involved with the hosting organization in terms of guidelines, information, and feedback. Very important that if your students are going to a certain company and they are normally going there, gathering their experiences and sharing them with others, it's fundamental. And then what you can start to develop, this is something that we are already doing, by the way, in erasmusinter.org or internship platform that you might know, is to work more with these peer reviews, quality checks, etc. So then a student, when deciding where to go to a company, can read, okay, what are the perceptions of other students? But I think that more structural measures are needed. So what we are trying to do is to encourage the European Commission to work on maybe a quality framework for traineeships, good practices, some kind of charter like the ECHE, but specific for companies, etc. It's a bit challenging because there are more than 8,000 hosting organizations in Erasmus traineeships, so it's even more than universities. But I think that this should be a priority in the next few years. And just a comment about this, when we check the data on the satisfaction with traineeships, it's 10 points lower than for student mobility. So there is a clear issue with traineeships that needs to be addressed in the next few years. I think you can definitely share it with your students. I mean, like, I don't think there's everything anywhere that you cannot share that feedback, right? Like, I don't think. And
No,
I think you should.
I think it's good, but that, like, it's how you present it, of course. But I think it's good to also address the things that can go wrong, to prepare them better for doing mobility and making an honest choice in this sense. Do you agree, Juan?
Yeah, of course. No, but and I agree with you, Tibe. Like, I don't think that you should just take any kind of random feedback and say, look, they told me this, right? But you probably should create, systems in which you can gather that information and then use it to explain to students, okay, this is what students normally think about going on a traineeship to this place, etc., right? And for the preparation phase, because of course, one person can have a bad experience, and that doesn't mean that a company is a bad host. So it's mostly about how you process that information.
I must agree. If there are any more questions, please have them in chat or unmute yourself. Otherwise, I would like to thank you again for joining us today, and thanking Juan for this very interesting presentation. Again, everything is recorded and will be put up on our website. I've shared some links in the chat as well, where you can find the CM project and the ticket project as well. And I encourage you to, again, join our community of practice so you can share your own experiences and let us know what we can do for you to increase the success of this project, because I think there is a lot of demand for interculturality and more information for staff, but also students, to make this an experience worthwhile, which is, of course, already it is, but as we can see from the presentation, there are still things to be improved on. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and I wish you a very lovely day from wherever you are. And again,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you everybody, and
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.